How does Washington take a step forward in the Big Ten in spring ball? Here to discuss that question, Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies. So this is one of the few spring segments that I'm doing this week here on the show, Roman, where a quarterback controversy is not at the center of attention for a football team. Washington knows Damon Williams, the guy, he should be the guy. I think he can be incredibly good. But it's everything else that needs to kind of get to his level outside of maybe the wide receiving core and running back room. Let's start with the offensive line. Has Jedd Fisch and the staff addressed that enough for it to improve?
So I feel like there's a little bit of a debate between fans where you add two offensive linemen through the portal, right? You bring Garen Hatchett back from Oklahoma, where he spent the 2024 season, unfortunately got hurt early on, so he didn't necessarily get a chance to play much there. And you bring in Carver Willis from Kansas State, who is one of the better tackles in the portal, to play either left or right tackle. And you have some time to figure that out in spring ball, where I think that this coaching staff did do enough where I look at adding, another year in the strength program for a guy like Paki Finau, a former four-star recruit, redshirt freshman, that this coaching staff is really high on, that played really well in the Sun Bowl, along with getting a guy like Zach Henning, who's had a couple years under his belt, played some tackle, played some guard, in to potentially compete for a starting job alongside Landon Hatchett, who's going to be taking over full-time at center, who didn't necessarily have any bit of an offseason last year because he was recovering from a torn ACL. So I think that with more depth along the offensive line and way more time for a lot of these younger guys to get ingrained in the strength and conditioning program and get up to speed at the college level, along with a full actual spring practice to work with, which this team did not have last year. Spencer, they had 7 healthy offensive linemen for spring ball, and 2 of those guys were walk-ons. There was not a lot going on in the trenches last year. So I think that it's going to take a step forward. We'll see how much, because a lot of these guys still are very, very unproven, but I think the talent is there, and I think the scheme could be there as well.
Well, the O-line, I think, gets kind of misconstrued sometimes when people or fans think about it, because typically you think, well, as long as you got four good ones, like, you can be fine. You could overcome one guy. And generally speaking, that's true. I think the best offensive lines have at least 6 guys who they feel are starting caliber, because then you have the ability to survive an injury and maybe flip this guy around from a positional standpoint. 6 or 7, I think, is the number that they want to, that most coaches, I think, would say they want to be at. And, the offensive linemen rotate a lot more than people realize. You think about receivers or running backs rotating in, there are a lot of offensive line units across the country at the highest levels of college football that will routinely put one guy in for a series at guard and then put another guy in for the same reason they sub in this receiver or that receiver, just, to keep a guy fresh because of what the game plan is on the drive, like whatever that reason may be. Somebody gets dinged up. So do you think Washington is going to be able to get to that sort of depth to where, they can build towards the offensive lines they had in the 22 and 23 seasons?
So that's a really great question, because when you look at that 23 season where they did win the Joe Moore Award, that started out as a really deep offensive line. And then you see Mateo Mele go down for the year, and Parker Brailsford slides in, and now he's an All-American center, right? You see Julius Buelow go down for a little bit of time, and Garen Hatchett slides in. So it's nice to have a guy like that back in the rotation. So I don't think they're necessarily there quite yet, because we haven't seen a lot of these guys where it's a lot of unproven redshirt freshmen. There's 1 or 2 true freshmen that they really like a lot. And I don't know how much these guys are going to play. I'm talking about Champ Tilialia, John Mills, just throw the names out there so people get familiar with them. I think that they've got the size, they have the talent up front to be able to do that. But a lot of it is younger guys. And we know that Jedd Fisch has no reservations about playing whoever is ready to see the field. We saw that from his time at Arizona, getting somebody like Jonas Avenaya on the field very, very quickly. So it's something that might take a little bit of time, but it's nice to have a full spring practice to be able to work things out. I think the talent is there, and now you've got a month to be able to say, hey, against this Ryan Walters front, which is going to create a lot of one-on-one matchups for these offensive linemen to really work and improve on over the course of 15 spring practices, I think we're going to see some improvement, but we're not really going to know until we get to September.
Looking elsewhere, as Washington continues along with spring practice, What's the biggest question in your mind? Because to me, the top question, hence why I started with it, is the offensive line. It was not anywhere close to where they needed to be. Now, Washington still got to a bowl game last year, so it wasn't, everything was a complete and utter disaster. But they end the year 6-7. Washington has higher aspirations than that. They feel like, and I think justifiably so, they're a program that can get to, or at least closer to, the top of the Big Ten than where they were at this past year. But the offensive line is question number one. What's primary question number two for this Huskies team?
It's the front seven. You saw last year, it was not very deep, where you saw some guys leave. There were a couple of injuries, and all of a sudden you couldn't stop the run in the back half of the season. And you played some really good teams, right? You played 3 college football playoff teams on the road in October and November. And as the season wore on and Javon Parker goes down with the Achilles, you see Zach Durfee lost for the season with turf toe. There are so many different things that just really diminish the depth up front. And Washington has gone out and addressed that. They bring in Simote Pepa from Utah, who I'm very, very high on. You get Ontario Thompson from Western Michigan, who's also got some Big Ten experience from his time at Iowa, and somebody who's familiar with just Jedd Fisch's program in Taitai Uyunglele from Arizona. So you bring in those guys on the defensive front. And then at linebacker, you also add 3 guys. You bring in Jacob Manu from Arizona, who we'll see what his season ends up looking like, where he's coming off a torn ACL. You bring in X-Ray Alexander from Central Florida, who was just a big physical body, who has really been productive over 2 seasons, one at Idaho and then one at Central Florida. And you also add Buda Alukta from Washington State, who was really productive there, had 3 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles, I want to say the number was off the top of my head, during the 2024 season at Washington State. So at a position where you certainly lost a lot, especially at linebacker, I think they've built up depth that you just didn't have last season, and you weren't able to rotate in fresh bodies. And, when you go to Iowa and you go to Indiana and you go to Penn State, especially, those are things that are not going to work out very well for you. So I think Jedd in year 2 has done a really good job of addressing needs that will really help you excel in the Big Ten. A lot of these guys are still unproven. You want to see how they fit in the scheme, but having a defensive coordinator in Ryan Walters, who understands life in the Big Ten and has lived it for the last 5 years at this point, I think that he knows what needs to happen. And I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like, because I think now you have a defensive line rotation that I don't want to say it's going to be elite by any stretch of the imagination, but if it's serviceable to somewhat above average, I think that this defensive line and this run defense can take a big step forward this season.
I think I know your answer to my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because maybe I'm wrong. If you look at all the transfers Washington's brought in, and you just listed a bunch of them, and you had to highlight one who is the most important for Washington to succeed this year, and let's say go over their win total, which is 7.5 according to our friends at FanDuel, who would that one guy be?
So I have a feeling you think I'm going to say Tacario Davis.
I do think that.
And I want to, but to keep you on your toes, I'm going to switch it up here a little bit. Because there's one guy who I just absolutely love talking about, because he's flown under the radar a little bit. And it's Northern Arizona transfer Alex McLaughlin, who's going to come in and he's going to play safety.
Great name. Great name. He's got the best hair in the game too. For anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go look up his headshot. Me too.
Awesome hair. Yeah. So I think that this is a guy who he was very, very productive at Northern Arizona. 167 tackles, 16 pass breakups, 6 interceptions over 2 seasons, and it's at the FCS level. But one thing that Ryan Walters has always had, especially during his time at Purdue, Spencer, as you know very well, is excellent safety play. He got that from Dylan Tiedemann during his time there. And I think that Alex McLaughlin, who, I just listed off the numbers, showed that he could be incredibly productive, is somebody who, if he is able to hang with the physicality at the FBS level, and when you watch the tape, I firmly believe that he can, is somebody who could really change this defense in a whole lot of different ways, where you want to walk him down. You want him to just play linebacker and help out and run support. He can do that. He's got the ability to play man coverage if you want him to. If he wants to drop back and have him play free safety over the top, he can do that as well. So he's a guy that I'm going to be watching very, very closely, because all the numbers are there, and all the numbers show that this is somebody who could thrive in a Ryan Walters scheme that is very friendly to defensive backs.
I just like the name. I think that lines him up for success. Do I have the better hair? Does he have the better hair? I'll leave that for the comment section to decide. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, great as always.